The town of Millhaven had a rule about Aldermore House, and the rule was that you didn't ask questions about the cellar. I heard it inside my first hour off the transport, from a grain broker who introduced himself before he introduced the warning. "There's a weeping thing down there," he said, like he was telling me about a bad water main. "Owners don't last, caretakers don't last. You'll hear her before the week's out, and then you'll be on the next transport home like the rest of them." I'd taken worse jobs for worse reasons. The pay was fair, the house was mine to restore over a season, and I'd spent 11 years in a uniform learning that most things people call haunted are just old and lonely, and in need of somebody who isn't afraid to sit with them a while. So I nodded at the broker, thanked him for the warning, and walked the 2 miles out to the house with my kid on my back. Aldermore was older than the colony charter, older than Prosser's Reach itself, built up out of foundation stone nobody local had quarried. I found that out my second night, prying up rotted floorboards in what had been a pantry, when the boards gave way onto a stair that shouldn't have existed on any survey I'd been handed. I went down anyway. A man who runs from every hole in his own floor doesn't last long in this trade, and curiosity has always outweighed my good sense. The stair led out into a round chamber cut from stone that wasn't stone, the walls faintly warm under my palm, carved with a script no colony record had ever mentioned. In the center, inside a curtain of light like held breath, stood a woman. She didn't scream and she didn't vanish, the 2 things the broker had promised me. She looked at me the way you look at the 100th stranger who's come to gawk, already tired of it before I'd said a word. Her skin was pale ash gray, veined faintly with a blue light that pulsed slow, like a second heartbeat under the first. Her hair was black and unbound to her waist. Her eyes, when they finally settled on me, were a pale coppery gold, and they held no fear at all. Only a weariness so old it had worn itself smooth. "Another one," she said. Her voice came through the light without disturbing it. "Stay if you must frighten yourself, human. I have stopped performing for it." I told her I wasn't there to be frightened, and I wasn't there to frighten her either, and then, because I couldn't think what else to say to a woman standing in a cage made of light, I asked her name. She didn't answer that night, but I noticed, climbing the stair afterward, that she'd watched me all the way up, and that nobody had ever asked her that before. I went back the second night, and the third, telling myself it was only that a hole in a client's floor needed documenting. By the fourth, I'd stopped lying to myself about it. I brought a lamp, set it where the light of the ward wouldn't drown it, and sat on the cold floor while she told me, in pieces, over many nights, what Millhaven had turned into a ghost story. The town had its own version by then, worn smooth by 2 centuries of retelling. Some said she'd murdered a lover and the house punished her for it. Some said she'd been a witch the old settlers sealed away before the charter was even signed. A boy at the feed store told me, with the flat confidence of a child repeating gospel, that if you knocked 3 times on the cellar door at midnight she'd answer with your own voice, and that would be the last anyone heard of you. None of it was true, and none of it was meant to be. It was easier, I came to understand, for a town to keep a weeping thing in a story, than to imagine a woman still breathing down there, still waiting on someone who never came. I asked her once why she'd never tried to explain herself to any of the others who'd come down that stair. She looked at me a long while before she answered. "Explaining myself was never the price. Caretaker," she said. "They wanted a monster or a mystery, and I learned early which was safer to give them. You are the first one who came back a second time without wanting either." Her name was Mirelle Seren, and she had been queen of a city that no longer had a name anyone living remembered. Her own uncle had held the regency in her minority, and found he preferred holding it. When her city fell to a war he'd started and she'd tried to stop, he'd sealed her here rather than kill her outright, calling it mercy in the record, and calling her an abomination to the guards who did the binding. The ward wasn't a prison built to break her. It was built, she said, to test whoever came looking, to see if anyone would ever want something from her that wasn't fear, or a good story, or proof for a bet made in town over cheap liquor. "Everyone who's come down here wanted one of those 3 things, she told me one night, her coppery eyes steady on mine through the curtain of light. "What do you want, caretaker?" I didn't have a fast answer. I still don't have a good one, only a true one. I told her I didn't much want anything, except to keep coming back, because it turned out I liked the sound of her voice better than the sound of an empty house, and because nobody in 200 years had thought to ask her a question that wasn't about how she died. "I hadn't died," she said. That was the trouble. And for the first time I heard something other than weariness in her voice. The ward tested me for it, not gently. On the 9th night the chamber filled with visions meant, I think, to send me running the way it had sent every drunk and every scholar and every treasure hunter running before me. My own house burning. My old unit dying again in a war I'd already buried. Morel herself screaming for me to leave before it took me to. I understood, sitting through it with my back against the cold stone and my hands shaking, that the ward wasn't testing whether I could be frightened. It was testing whether I'd ask her for comfort in return, whether I'd want rescuing from my own fear by the very woman it had spent 2 centuries trying to break. I didn't ask her for anything. I told her, when my voice came back to me, that I was still there, and that I wasn't going anywhere, and that she didn't owe me a single word about it. The vision stopped like a held breath let go. Morel's eyes had gone wet, though she hadn't cried, not once, not through any of it. She'd told me once that her people didn't weep the way mine did, that grief in her showed as stillness instead. She was still now, entirely still, watching me the way you watch something you've stopped believing could exist. No one has ever sat through it without asking me to make it stop, she said. Not for 200 years. I told her I hadn't come down here to be freed of anything. I'd come down to sit with her. And that was the whole of it. And if the house wanted to test me on that every night for the rest of the season, it could go right ahead. The light around her didn't fade slowly. It broke all at once, near dawn, like a held note finally let go. Not violent, just finished, the way ice finally gives after a long thaw nobody was watching closely enough to see coming. Morel stood in the plain stone chamber with nothing between us for the first time, and she looked, for one long moment, like she didn't know what to do with a room that didn't require her to perform for it. She stepped forward. Her boots, I hadn't even known she had boots, hidden under 200 years of stillness, rang once against the stone, the most ordinary sound I'd ever been glad to hear. I still don't know what I want, she told me, quiet, honest, the weariness gone out of her voice and something else moved in to take its place. But I know I don't want to go back to being a story Millhaven tells to frighten its children. I told her she wouldn't have to. I told her the house was mine to keep for a season, and after that, hers, if she wanted it, that nobody was putting her back in a hole in the floor while I had breath to say otherwise. We climbed the stair together at first light, and I remember thinking, watching her stop at the top step to feel real sun on her face, for what she told me was the first time in 2 lifetimes, that the broker in town had been wrong about exactly one thing. It wasn't the house that had needed someone brave enough not to run. It was her, and she'd been waiting on someone to notice the difference.